I'm writing this from a Comfort Inn in Bar Harbor, room 118, ground floor, because I can't do heights right now, and I'll explain that later. The heat hasn't kicked on in about 40 minutes, and the window is doing that thing where condensation pools along the seal and drips onto the sill every 9 or 10 seconds. I keep counting the drips. I keep losing count and starting over. I think that's fine. I think counting is fine. My name is Ren Sujimoto, and I was, until 6 days ago, a seasonal interpretive ranger at Acadia National Park. GS5, second season. I say was, not because I've been fired, but because I submitted my resignation this morning via email from my phone in the parking lot of the Hulls Cove Visitor Center while my hands were shaking badly enough that I had to correct the spelling of my own name twice. I copied my supervisor, the chief of interpretation, and the superintendent. The superintendent has already responded. She asked me to reconsider and to call her directly. I haven't called. This morning, at 6:15 a.m., park management closed the Jordan Pond Trail system, the southern half of the Bubbles Trail, and a section of the carriage road network between intersections 14 and 17. The stated reason, and you can check this on the park's website or the NPS alert page, is hazardous trail conditions pending geological assessment. That language is interesting. That's the language you use when something is physically changed about the ground. Not when a tree falls, not when there's ice damage. When the ground itself has done something unexpected. I know what it did. I was standing on it when it started. Let me go back. I grew up in Brewer, Maine. If you don't know Maine, Brewer is across the Penobscot River from Bangor. Not a remarkable place. Paper mill town that lost its paper mill and became a town where people live because rent is cheaper than Bangor, and you can walk across the bridge to work. My mother taught 4th grade at the Capri Street Elementary until it closed. My father sold flooring for a company out of Ellsworth. They're both alive. They're both fine. I mention them because I need you to understand that I come from people who are practical and quiet and do not, as a rule, elaborate on things they can't explain. My father once saw ball lightning come through the kitchen window during a thunderstorm, hover over the stove for about 4 seconds, and exit through the wall. He mentioned it once, at Thanksgiving in 2014. My mother said, that was the end of it. I come from people like this. I got the Acadia job the way most seasonal NPS employees do. I applied to 11 parks. Acadia called back because I'm local and because my degree is in geology. University of Maine, 2019. The geology matters. It's why they put me on the programs they put me on, and it's why I was where I was last Tuesday morning at an hour when I should have been asleep. Seasonal interpretation work at Acadia is mostly what you'd expect. You lead walks, you give talks at campground amphitheaters, you staff the visitor center desk and answer questions about where to see the sunrise and whether the gift shop sells magnets. It is not serious work. I don't mean that as an insult to the NPS or to my colleagues. I mean, the work is structured to be approachable, friendly, and surface level because the audience is families on vacation and older couples in rented SUVs and people who have driven up from Boston for a long weekend. You are not delivering graduate seminars. You are helping people have a good time in a beautiful place. But Acadia has a geology problem, and that's where I came in. The park sits on Mount Desert Island, which is a granite and gabbro intrusion. The bedrock is old, Devonian age granites, maybe 360 to 420 million years. The mountains Cadillac, Champlain, the Bubbles, Penobscot, Sargent are essentially the exposed roots of much larger formations that have been eroded away over deep time. What you see when you look at the landscape is absence. What was there is gone. What remains is the skeleton. The geology program I was assigned to run was a twice-weekly walk along the Jordan Pond Trail, focused on glacial features, erratics, striations, U-shaped valley profiles, the usual. I gave this program on Tuesdays and Fridays at 10 a.m. It was well attended. People like rocks. People especially like rocks when you tell them the rocks are scratched by ice. That was a mile thick. It makes them feel appropriately small. Here's what I need to explain before I can tell you what happened. There is a section of the Jordan Pond Trail on the western shore, roughly a quarter-mile south of the Jordan Pond House, where the trail crosses an exposed granite ledge. The ledge extends maybe 40 feet from the tree line to the pond's edge. It is smooth, glacially polished, and slightly concave, like the inside of a shallow bowl. In geological terms, this is unremarkable. It's a roche moutonnée, which is a formation shaped by glacial abrasion on one side and plucking on the other. You see them everywhere in Acadia. They're in the textbook. They're on the interpretive signs. What is unusual about this particular ledge, and I did not notice this during my first season, only during my second, is its acoustic quality. I don't mean it echoes. I mean the opposite. It absorbs. When you stand on that ledge, especially in the early morning before the trail gets foot traffic, the ambient sound level drops. Not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm a casual hiker, but measurably. I know it's measurable because I downloaded a decibel meter app onto my phone in the second week of June and confirmed it. Standing on the surrounding trail, the ambient level was typically 35 to 42 decibels. Wind, birds, water lapping, normal boreal forest soundscape. Standing on the ledge, it dropped to 28 to 31 decibels. And there was a quality to the silence that I can only describe as active. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that was eating sound. The way a heavy curtain in an empty room doesn't just block noise, but seems to pull it inward and hold it. I mentioned this to Doug Pelletier, who's been a permanent interpretive ranger at Acadia for 11 years. I mentioned it casually. I said something like, "Hey, have you noticed the weird quiet spot on the Jordan Pond West Shore?" Doug is a birder. He knows the park's soundscape better than anyone on staff. He looked at me with an expression I didn't understand at the time and said, "Don't linger there." I asked what he meant. He said, "I mean, don't stand there longer than you have to when you're doing your program. Keep the group moving through that section." I asked why. He said, "Because it's not a good place to stop." And then he went back to his sandwich, and that was the end of the conversation. I want to be very precise about Doug's tone. He was not frightened. He was not being mysterious. He delivered this advice the same way you'd tell someone not to leave food in their car in bear country. Practical, procedural, like he was bored of knowing it. I followed his advice for most of June. I kept my groups moving through that section. I pointed out the glacial polish. I showed them the striations, and I walked them past the ledge without stopping. But the geology program was mine, and the ledge was genuinely the most interesting exposed surface on that stretch of trail. And by the last week of June, I had started pausing there again. Not for long, 2 or 3 minutes. Enough to let people take photos and ask questions about the ice. Nothing happened. The silence was there that absorbed quality. But it wasn't alarming. It was pleasant, actually. On a hot day, with a group of 15 people all talking at once, the momentary hush was a relief. A few visitors commented on it. "It's so peaceful here. Listen to how quiet it is." I smiled and agreed and kept moving. July is the peak month at Acadia. The island fills, the parking lots at Jordan Pond overflow by 8 a.m. The trails are clogged. The programs balloon to 30, 40 people, which is too many for an interpretive walk, but you do it anyway because you're seasonal and you don't push back on things that aren't safety issues. On July 2nd, I ran my Tuesday geology walk with a group of about 35. It was hot, 84 degrees, which for coastal Maine in early July is unusual. The group was slow and spread out, and I was having trouble keeping them together. When we reached the ledge, I stopped. I gave my glacial erosion talk. I let people explore the surface, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The silence had boundary. I don't mean I could see it. I mean I could feel it with my feet. There was a line on the granite not visible, not a crack or a color change, where the acoustic quality shifted. On one side of the line, you could hear the pond, the wind, a motorboat somewhere out past the bubbles. On the other side, the sound was halved. and the line was roughly circular, centered, as near as I could tell, on a point about 20 feet from the water's edge, near the apex of the ledge's concavity. I stepped back and forth across it 3 times. I wasn't imagining it. The boundary was sharp. A foot of lateral movement made a clear difference. No one in the group noticed. They were looking at the view. One woman asked me if the scratches in the rock were from dinosaurs. I said no, from glaciers, and I moved the group along. That night, I went back. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't courage. It wasn't professional curiosity. It was the specific combination of knowing something was there and having no one to discuss it with. Doug had made it clear he didn't want to talk about it. I didn't have close friends on the seasonal staff. My ex-girlfriend was in Portland, and we hadn't spoken since April. My parents were 40 minutes away, and the idea of calling my father to say, "Dad, there's a weird quiet spot on a rock at work," was so precisely the kind of thing he would respond to with a 4-second silence and a subject change that, I couldn't face it. So I went alone, because that's what you do when you can't share something. You go deeper into it by yourself. It was just past 10 p.m. Still light enough to see. Barely. July in Maine. The sky holds onto a blue-gray glow until almost 11. I parked at the Jordan Pond lot, which was empty except for a maintenance vehicle. I walked the trail with a headlamp I didn't turn on. The ledge, in near darkness, was different. The silence was larger. The boundary I'd felt that morning had expanded. I could feel it from the trail, 10 feet before I reached the exposed granite. The quality of the air changed. Not temperature, not wind. Something about the air's willingness to carry sound. My footsteps on the gravel trail were crisp, normal. My footsteps on the granite were muted, felt more than heard, like walking on carpet over concrete. I walked to the center of the ledge, to the point I'd estimated was the focal point of the silence. I stood there, and I felt the granite breathe. I need to be careful with this word because I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean the rock surface beneath my boots moved, expanded and contracted, a motion so slight that if I hadn't been standing still with my weight evenly distributed, I would have missed it entirely. But it was there, a rhythm. Not fast, maybe one cycle, every 4 or 5 seconds. An expansion of perhaps a millimeter, maybe less, followed by a contraction, like standing on the chest of something immeasurably large that was sleeping just below the surface. I stood there for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when I arrived at the center, and again when I left. In those 11 minutes, the following things happened. The rhythm did not change. The silence deepened until I could hear my own blood moving. The condensation on the granite surface, the dew that collects on exposed rock in humid Maine evenings, began to move. Not flow, not drip, organize. The thin film of moisture on the granite was migrating slowly toward the center point, toward where I stood. I could see it because the last gray light from the sky caught the wet surface, and I could watch the sheen redistribute itself, pulling inward like water finding a drain. Except there was no drain. There was nothing at the center. Just granite and my boots. I left. I walked back to my car at a pace I will call brisk, and drove to the Comfort Inn, which is where I'd been staying because seasonal housing was full, and they gave NPS employees a rate. I sat on this bed. I did not sleep. I worked through every geological explanation I could think of. Thermal contraction of granite after a hot day, possible, but not rhythmic. Tidal effects on the bedrock from the adjacent pond. Jordan Pond is freshwater and doesn't have tides. Seismic microtremors possible, and I checked the USGS seismic data for Mount Desert Island the next morning. Nothing. No recorded activity. I went back the following night, July 3rd. I brought a better flashlight, a notebook, a digital thermometer I borrowed from the maintenance shop by telling the tech I was calibrating my weather observations, and I brought a bottle of water, which I poured onto the granite surface about 6 feet from center, and watched. The water sat in a normal puddle for about 90 seconds. Then it began to move toward the center. Not fast. If you were walking past, you would never see it. But if you stood and watched, the way I stood and watched, you could see the leading edge of the puddle creeping inward, maybe an inch a minute, along the surface of the granite. And the granite was not tilted toward the center. The concavity of the ledge, the bowl shape, should have directed water toward the pond, which was downhill. The water was moving uphill, toward the center, toward me. I moved. I stepped off the center point. The water continued toward the point I'd been standing on. So it wasn't following me, it was following the location. I wrote all of this down. I took a video on my phone of the water movement. When I reviewed the video later in my room, the movement was visible, but looked like it could be explained by wind. It couldn't. There was no wind that night. But the video wouldn't convince anyone. I knew that. On July 4th, the park was overrun. Independence Day at Acadia is a chaos. I worked a 12-hour shift at the visitor center and didn't go to the ledge. That night, there were fireworks over Bar Harbor, and the island was loud and bright, and I stood in the Comfort Inn parking lot and watched them and felt an emotion I can only describe as homesickness. Except I was 40 minutes from the house I grew up in. I was homesick for a place I couldn't identify. July 5th, I went back. I need to explain something about my state of mind. I was not afraid. I understand that reading this, you might think fear would be the appropriate response to rock that breathes in water that moves uphill. But I'm a geologist. Anomalies are not frightening. They're interesting. Fear comes from anomalies that threaten you, and nothing about the ledge had threatened me. The silence was peaceful. The breathing was slow. The water moved gently. Everything about the phenomenon was. And I keep coming back to this word, tender. It felt like being in the presence of something that was trying very hard not to startle me. This is the part that, in retrospect, should have frightened me most. On the night of July 5th, I walked to the center of the ledge and sat down. Cross-legged, on the granite, I put my palms flat on the rock surface. The breathing was immediately clearer through my hands. The rhythm was steady, 4 to 5 seconds per cycle, and through my palms I could feel something else, a vibration beneath the rhythm. Not mechanical, not like a motor or a seismic event. It was textured, it had complexity, like pressing your hand against someone's back while they talk and feeling the speech's vibration without being able to make out words. There was information in the vibration. I couldn't decode it, but I could feel its structure. I sat there for 40 minutes. When I stood up, my knees ached and my palms were red from the cold granite, and I felt better than I had in months. Rested, clear, like I'd slept deeply and well for the first time since I'd started the season. The walk back to my car was effortless. I drove to the hotel and slept for 9 hours without waking. I hadn't slept 9 hours in years. I went back every night for the next week. Each night, I sat on the ledge for longer. 40 minutes. An hour and a half. Each night the sensation deepened. The vibration became more detailed. I still couldn't interpret it, but I began to feel it as something with direction, not random, not diffuse, but aimed, coming from below and to the northeast, as if the source were not directly beneath me, but offset, deeper, somewhere under the bubbles or the ridge beyond. And each morning I woke feeling better than the morning before. More focused, less anxious. My programs improved. My supervisor commented that I seemed more confident, more present with visitors. I was. The ledge was giving me something. Rest, or focus, or balance, or something I don't have a word for. And I was grateful for it. On July 12th, I brought a geological hammer. I want to explain this carefully because the act itself was a violation of NPS policy. You do not strike exposed bedrock in a national park. You do not collect samples. You do not deface natural surfaces. I knew this. I had signed documents acknowledging this. And I brought the hammer anyway because the vibration had changed. It had developed a pulse, not the breathing that was still there, still steady. But underneath the breathing, in the complex vibration I'd been feeling through my palms for a week, a new pattern had emerged. A pulse, irregular but insistent. Every 20 to 30 seconds, a beat that was distinctly stronger than the ambient vibration, like a knock, like something tapping from below. I didn't strike the granite. I want to be clear about that. I brought the hammer, And I sat down and I pressed the metal head of the hammer against the granite surface. And I listened through the handle. The pulse was louder through the steel. And it was not random. The knocks came in groups. 3, then silence, then 2, then silence, then 3, then 5, then silence. I wrote down the sequence as I felt it. I filled a page. Back in my room, I stared at the numbers and tried to find a pattern and couldn't. They weren't Fibonacci. They weren't prime. They weren't any mathematical sequence I recognized. They were something else. I stared at the page for 2 hours, and then I put it in the nightstand drawer, and I noticed my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from excitement. The kind of excitement that has a chemical taste in your mouth and makes the light in the room seem brighter than it should be. I recognized the feeling. I'd felt it once before, in college, during a field study in the Katahdin region, when I found a mineral inclusion that my professor said was anomalous and worth further study. The feeling of being the only person who knows something. The feeling of standing at the edge of a discovery that hasn't been made yet. It is, if I'm being honest, the best feeling I have ever experienced. Better than love. Better than sex. Better than the 9 hours of clean sleep the ledge had been giving me. The feeling of being first. This is where I need to talk about Yui. Yui Nakamura was a second-season biological science technician working on the Peregrine Falcon monitoring program. We shared a break schedule because the interpretation and biology divisions operated out of the same bullpen in the seasonal office trailer behind the visitor center. She was from Saco, Maine. She was 26. She had a way of eating lunch that I found inexplicably moving. She unpacked each item from her bag, separately, arranged everything on the table in front of her, and then sat for a moment looking at it all before she started eating. Like she was confirming that it was real. Like she needed to verify her lunch before she could trust it. We weren't close. We were friendly. We talked about weather and schedules and the summer people. But on July 13th, she sat down across from me in the break area and said, "You look different." I said, "I've been sleeping well." She said, "No, it's not that. You look like you found something." And she held eye contact in a way that made me understand she was not making small talk. She was asking. I told her about the ledge. I told her everything. The silence, the boundary, the breathing, the water, the vibration, the pulse. I talked for 20 minutes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look skeptical. She ate her lunch in that careful, methodical way. And she listened, and when I was done, she said, "Show me." We went that night. July 13th. I want to describe what happened precisely because I have gone over it in my head more times than I can count, and precision feels like the only thing I can still control. We parked at the Jordan Pond lot at 10:15 p.m. The sky was overcast, no residual glow. I used my headlamp. Yui had her own. We walked the trail to the ledge in about 12 minutes. When we reached the boundary, the line where the silence started, I stopped and asked her if she could feel it. She stood still for a moment. Then she nodded. We walked to the center of the ledge. I sat down. She sat next to me. I told her to put her palms on the granite. She did. The breathing was there. The vibration was there. The pulse was there. I watched her face in the faint light of her headlamp, which she'd angled down so it lit only the rock surface. Her expression didn't change for about 2 minutes. Then her lips parted, and she said very quietly, "It's warm." The granite was warm. Not from the day's heat, it was overcast and had been cool. The warmth was coming from below, and she was right. In all my visits, I'd noted the cold of the granite on my palms, but this night it was warm, distinctly. Like putting your hand on the hood of a car that's been running. Not hot. Warm. Alive warm. We sat for about 30 minutes. Yui didn't speak. I didn't speak. The silence around us was profound in a way that I haven't experienced before or since. Not just quiet, complete, like the inside of something that had closed around us. The pond was right there, 20 feet away, and I couldn't hear it. The wind and the spruce trees above the trail, gone. My own breathing was the loudest thing in the world. Then Yui said, "It knows we're here." I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't have to. I could feel it too. A change in the vibration. Not louder. More focused. The complexity I'd been feeling for a week had organized itself. The random-seeming texture had resolved into something that felt, through my palms, like attention. Like the difference between standing in a room alone and standing in a room where someone has just opened their eyes. We left at 11:20 p.m. In the parking lot, sitting on the hood of my car, Yui said 3 things that I need to record. She said, "That's not geological." She said, "Don't tell anyone else." She said, "I want to go back tomorrow." The way she said the 3rd thing worried me. Not the words, the tone. It was the tone of someone who has just tasted something and is already thinking about the next time they can taste it again. I recognized it because it was the same tone I would have used, and hearing it from outside was like looking in a mirror and not liking what you see. I said, "We should think about it." She said, "Okay." She drove back to her housing on the other side of the island. I drove to the Comfort Inn. I did not sleep 9 hours. I slept 3, badly, and woke up with a feeling in my chest like I'd forgotten to do something critically important. We went back the next night, July 14th, and the next, and the next. I need to compress time here because what happened over the following week was not dramatic. It was cumulative. Each night we went to the ledge. Each night we sat on the warm granite and felt the vibration and the pulse and the attention. Each night the experience was a little more, not scarier, not more intense in the way a noise gets louder, more specific. The vibration began to differentiate. Sitting next to Yui, I could feel, and this is the part I'm least confident about, the part where I wonder if I was interpreting sensation as meaning I could feel the vibration reach us differently. Like 2 notes in a chord, like it was addressing us separately. Yui felt it too. She confirmed without me prompting. She said, on the night of July 17th, "It's speaking to you in a different key than it's speaking to me." She said this matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. I asked her what her key felt like. She said, "Like being forgiven for something I didn't do." I asked her what she meant. She shook her head and said she didn't know. That was just the closest she could get. I didn't tell her what my key felt like. It felt like being needed. Specifically and structurally needed, the way a beam is needed by a roof. Not wanted, not loved, needed. As if something enormous had a space in it that was exactly my shape and was pressing gently against the granite surface from below, trying to show me where I fit. We did our jobs during the day. We were excellent at our jobs. I have never given better interpretive programs than I gave during that week. I was articulate, patient, enthusiastic, knowledgeable. Yui's Falcon monitoring reports were meticulous. We were performing our best professional selves. I note this because it made everything easier to justify. Whatever the ledge was doing to us, or for us, it was making us better at being people. More present, more capable, more real. On July 18th, Yui brought a sleeping bag and said she wanted to sleep on the ledge. I said no. She looked at me, and I saw the first flicker of something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not desperation, calculation. She was assessing whether I was an obstacle. I said, "Yui, listen to yourself." She said, "I have been. Have you?" I said no again. I said we should take a night off. She agreed, reluctantly. We didn't go to the ledge that night. I lay in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling and felt in my palms the ghost of the vibration. Not a memory of the feeling, the actual feeling, faint but present, as if the granite were still transmitting and my hands had learned to receive. I called Doug Pelletier the next morning, July 19th. I caught him before his shift. I said, "Doug, what do you know about the ledge on the Jordan Pond, West Shore?" There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough for me to hear a truck pass on the road behind him. Then he said, "How many nights?" I said, 12. He said a word I won't reproduce here, and then he said, "Meet me at the maintenance yard. Bring your car. Don't tell Nakamura." I met him at the yard at 7:30 a.m. He was standing by his truck with a manila folder. He handed it to me and said, "Read this, and then we'll talk." Inside the folder was a collection of printouts, internal NPS documents, not publicly available, incident reports, mostly spanning from 2003 to 2021. I'll summarize what they contained. In 2003, a geological survey team from the University of Maine, my own university, conducted a routine bedrock assessment of the Jordan Pond area as part of a long-term erosion monitoring project. During the survey, one member of the team, a PhD student named Carla Dunning, reported anomalous thermal readings from a section of exposed granite on the western shore. The readings were dismissed as instrument error. Dunning returned to the site repeatedly over the following 2 weeks. She was found by a trail crew on August 14, 2003, lying face down on the granite ledge at 3 a.m., unresponsive. She was hospitalized for hypothermia and dehydration. When she recovered, she told doctors she had been listening. She did not return to the program. She left the university the following semester. There was no follow-up. In 2009, a seasonal maintenance worker named James Ouellette reported hearing a heartbeat in the rock while performing trail repairs near the same location. He filed a report with his supervisor. The supervisor noted the report and filed it. Ouellette continued working in the park for 2 more seasons without incident, but his housing roommate noted that Ouellette went for walks at night and always went in the same direction. Ouellette did not return for a 4th season. No forwarding address. In 2015, 2 visitors from New Jersey reported to a ranger at the Jordan Pond house that they had witnessed the ground moving on the ledge. They described it as breathing motion. The ranger filed the report. It was categorized as visitor misperception, geological no action required. In 2017, a park geologist named Sandra Chen was assigned to investigate a formal complaint from a local resident about unusual vibrations felt from a waterfront property on the western shore of Jordan Pond. Chen conducted a 3-day assessment. Her report is 2 pages long. The first page is standard. Normal geological findings, no anomalies detected. The second page is a single paragraph, and I will reproduce it here from memory because I read it 4 times. The exposed granite surface at the location described by the complainant exhibits properties I am unable to explain within the scope of this assessment. I recommend the site be monitored seasonally and that extended foot traffic be discouraged. I do not recommend further investigation at this time. This recommendation is not based on safety concerns, but on professional judgment that some features of the natural environment are best documented at a distance. That last sentence, I read it 4 times. Doug let me sit with the folder for about 20 minutes. Then he said, "Sandra quit the NPS 2 months after writing that. She's in private consulting now. I talked to her once, in 2019. She told me the same thing I told you. Don't linger." I said, "Doug, it's gotten stronger." He looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not surprise, resignation. "Yeah," he said, "it does that." I asked him what he meant. He said, "In 2003, you had to stand on the center point for an hour before you felt anything. In 2009, it was 30 minutes. When Sandra did her assessment in 2017, it was immediate. I went out there last fall, after the park closed for the season, just to check. The boundary was at the trail. Rin, when I started here, the boundary was 10 feet from the center. It's been growing." I asked him, growing toward what? He said, "I think that's the wrong question." I asked him what the right question was. He said, "The right question is, what's growing? And I don't ask that question because I don't want to know the answer." He took the folder back. He said, "Take tonight off. Take a week off. Go visit your parents. Let Nakamura handle herself." I said I wasn't sure Yui could handle herself. He looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Tired. Not tired from lack of sleep. Tired the way a structure is tired. Tired the way a bridge gets tired from carrying weight year after year until the metal itself has changed. "That's not your responsibility," he said. But it was. Because I had brought her there. I didn't take the night off. I didn't go see my parents. I went to the ledge. Alone. One more time. I needed to feel it one more time to know what I was deciding about. July 19th, 10:45 p.m. The boundary had moved again. I felt it on the carriage road, not on the trail, on the carriage road, which was a full 50 feet further from the ledge than the trail. The air changed, the sound dropped. The quality of the ground under my feet shifted from gravel over compacted earth to something that felt absurdly like skin over bone. I walked to the ledge. The warmth was palpable from 6 feet away. The granite was radiating heat, not sun-baked heat, biological heat, the heat of a living surface. I sat down at the center. The vibration was immediate and overwhelming. Not loud, I don't want to give the impression of intensity, as volume. Overwhelming the way a view from a great height is overwhelming. The way seeing the Milky Way from a truly dark location is overwhelming. Too much information for the body to process. The pulse was rapid now, one knock every 3 or 4 seconds, and the groups had changed. Where before, I'd counted sequences of 2, 3, 5. Now the sequences were longer. 7, 11, 13. Primes. They were primes, and I could feel the direction. Clearly, specifically, northeast and down. Deep. The source was not beneath the ledge. The ledge was a window. The source was somewhere under the mountain, under Penobscot, or Sargent, or deeper, under the granite itself, under the roots of the island, in the Devonian dark where the magma had cooled 400 million years ago, and something had either been sealed inside or had grown in the silence since. I pressed my palms flat, and I felt it press back. Not physically, not like a push, like recognition, like the feeling you get when someone you haven't seen in years walks into a room and sees you before you see them, and you feel their gaze land on you, and something in your body shifts to accommodate being perceived. It perceived me, and I perceived it. I can't describe what it was. I can describe what it felt like. It felt like standing at the bottom of a well and looking up and seeing not the sky, but an eye, except the eye was made of the same stone as the well and had been there longer than the sky. It was not looking at me with interest or hunger or your love, but with patience. The patience of geology, the patience of a thing that has been awake for longer than there have been things with ears to hear it, and has only recently, in the last 20 years maybe, which is nothing, which is less than a breath in its time frame, become able to reach the surface. It was not malevolent. I want to be clear about this. I did not feel threatened. I felt invited. The way you feel invited by a whirlpool, the way you feel invited by a cliff edge. The invitation is real. The invitation is genuine. And the invitation will kill you, not because the thing that invites you wants you dead, but because you are made of the wrong materials to survive where it lives. I stood up, my legs were shaking. I walked off the ledge. The moment I crossed the boundary, which was now at the tree line, I noted at the tree line, which was 15 feet further than it had been 3 hours earlier. The sound came back like a door opening, wind, water, a barred owl somewhere on the ridge. The world rushed in to fill the space the silence had made, and I gasped like I'd been holding my breath, and maybe I had. I drove to the hotel. I sat on this bed. I picked up my phone and called Yui. She didn't answer. I called again. No answer. I texted, "Where are you?" 3 minutes later, she texted back, "At the ledge." I called again. She answered this time. I could hear the silence on her end. That specific, absolute, absorptive silence. She was sitting on the granite. I knew it. "Yui, get up." "I'm fine, Ren. The boundary has moved. It's at the tree line now. It grew by 15 feet in 3 hours. Silence. Not the ledge's silence. The silence of someone choosing not to respond. "Yui, I'm coming to get you." "Don't." "Why?" "Because if you come back tonight, you won't leave." She said this with absolute calm, absolute certainty, and I knew she was right. I knew it the way I knew the rock was granite, and the ice had been a mile thick. If I walked back onto that ledge tonight, in the state I was in, vibrating with the afterimage of that vast, patient attention, I would sit down and I would not stand up. "Are you going to leave?" I asked. "In a bit. Yui, I'll leave. I just want to sit a little longer. Promise me." "I promise." I sat on the bed and stared at my phone. At 1:47 a.m., she texted, "Home safe." I exhaled. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I slept for 4 hours and dreamed of being underground, in a warm, dark space where the walls pulsed with a slow rhythm, and I was not afraid, and I was not alone, and I did not want to leave. The next morning, July 20th, yesterday, I went to the visitor center early. Yui's truck was already in the lot. She was in the break area, eating breakfast in her careful, methodical way. She looked up at me and smiled, and she looked beautiful, and I felt a surge of something that was not attraction but adjacency. The feeling of being next to someone who has seen the same thing you have. It is the most intimate sensation I know. "I measured the boundary this morning," she said, "before my shift." "How far?" "It's at intersection 15 on the carriage road." I did the math in my head. Intersection 15 was nearly a quarter mile from the ledge. In June, the boundary had been 10 feet from the center point. It was expanding, and the rate of expansion was accelerating. "Yui, we have to report this." "Report what?" "That a rock is quiet? That the phenomenon is growing? That it's affecting a larger area every day? That the geological—" "It's not geological," she said. She said it the same way she'd said it in the parking lot that first night. Flat. Certain. "You know that." I did know that. I'd known it since I felt it press back. "Then, what do we report?" She looked at me, and her expression changed. The calm, methodical Yui was still there, but underneath it, something else. Something I recognized from my own face when I looked in the bathroom mirror that morning. A hunger that did not have a name. "We don't report," she said. "We go back." "And do what?" "Listen, really listen. Not sitting on the surface with our palms down like children at a seance. I mean, actually try to understand what it's communicating. The primes, Ren, it's sending primes. That's not random. That's not geological. That's a language being calibrated to the simplest possible receiver. It's checking if we can count." I stared at her. "It's teaching us to hear it," she said. "I didn't go to the ledge that night. I want to make sure that's recorded. I didn't go. I stayed in my room at the Comfort Inn, and I felt the vibration in my palms, and I didn't go. The not going was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than my parents' silence. Harder than the breakup. Harder than every empty night in this hotel room since May. The ledge was a quarter mile away, across the island, and I could feel it reaching for me through the granite that underlies the entire island, through the bedrock that is continuous from Jordan Pond to Bar Harbor to this parking lot, and the only thing between me and it was the 8 inches of concrete foundation under this building. Yui went. I know because I texted her at midnight, and she didn't respond until 4 a.m. Her text said, "It's not just counting anymore." I called her. She didn't pick up. I texted, "What do you mean?" She replied, "I can hear it without touching the rock now." Then I could hear it from the parking lot. Then I can hear it right now. Then the message that made me get in my car and drive to her housing. "It's under everything, Ren. The whole island is the ledge." I got to her housing unit at 4:30 a.m. She was sitting on the front steps, in the dark. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. She was sitting perfectly still with her hands at her sides, palms down, pressing against the concrete step. "Yui?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were clear. She was not distressed. She was not confused. She looked the way she looked when she was arranging her lunch on the table. Like she was confirming that something was real. "Can you feel it from here?" she asked. I pressed my hand against the concrete beside her. And I could. Faint. Rhythmic. The breathing, the pulse, the primes. Through the concrete, through the foundation, through the fill and the subsoil, and into the bedrock that connected every surface structure on the island to the granite beneath. "We need to call the superintendent," I said. "And tell her what?" "That there is an expanding geological anomaly affecting the bedrock of the park, and it needs to be assessed by someone with more authority than 2 seasonal employees." Yui looked at me, and I watched her make a decision. "Okay," she said. I called the superintendent's emergency line at 5:05 a.m. I got voicemail. I left a message that was, I am sure, incoherent. I said something about anomalous vibrations and expanding boundaries, and that the Jordan Pond area needed to be assessed. I left my number. I hung up. Then I called Doug Pelletier. He answered on the second ring. The boundary is at the carriage road. I said, how far? Intersection 15. Jesus Christ. Doug, it's accelerating. Yeah. You knew this was going to happen. I knew it was happening. I didn't know the speed. What do we do? You get off this island. I can't just, you get off this island, Ren, today. Get in your car and drive across the causeway and don't come back. Tell Nakamura the same thing. Doug, what is it? A long silence. I don't know. Sandra didn't know. Carla Dunning didn't know, and it put her in the hospital for 3 weeks. I've been managing this for 11 years by telling people not to stand there. That's it. That's the whole plan. Don't stand there. Don't linger. Keep people moving through. And pray that whatever it is, stays slow. It's not slow anymore. I know. Doug, she can hear it through concrete. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. This one had weight. Get her off the island, he said. Now, this morning. What are you going to do? I'm going to call the superintendent myself, and then I'm going to call Sandra Chin and see if she ever found anyone who could actually explain this. And then I'm going to do something I should have done a decade ago. What? Put it on paper. All of it. Everything I've told seasonal staff to do, and everything I've seen, and everything I've pretended was manageable. If they're going to close trails, they'll need a reason, and I'm going to give them one that doesn't sound insane. He hung up. I went back to Yui. She was still on the steps. I told her we needed to leave the island. She said, I know. She said it the way you agree to leave a party where you're the last one having fun. Compliant, but unconvinced. We packed. I packed faster because I was living out of a hotel room, and she had a full housing unit. I helped her carry boxes. The whole time, I could feel the vibration through every surface I touched. The concrete, the wooden stairs, the asphalt parking lot. It was faint, but it was everywhere. The whole island was humming. We drove in separate vehicles. At the causeway, the bridge that connects Mount Desert Island to the mainland, I pulled over and got out. I stood on the bridge and I put my hands on the railing. I could feel it in the steel, not on the mainland side. I walked to the middle of the bridge and back. The vibration extended exactly to the island side abutment of the bridge, not 1 foot further. The boundary, whatever it was, whatever it had grown to overnight, stopped at the island's edge, at the place where the granite gave way to water and the bedrock dove beneath the ocean floor. I got back in my car. I drove across. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw Yui's truck behind me. We stopped at a gas station in Trenton, the first town on the mainland. I got out. She got out. Can you still feel it? I asked. She pressed her palm against the concrete gas pump island. She stood there for a moment. Then she shook her head. No, she said. And she looked like someone who had just been told that a person they loved had died. Not shocked. Emptied. We stood in the gas station parking lot for a while. I bought us both coffee from the machine inside. It was bad. We drank it. I'm going to my parents', I said. She nodded. Where will you go? My sister's. In Saco. Okay. Ren. Yeah. I can still hear it. I looked at her. Not through the ground, just in my head, the rhythm, the primes. I can hear them if I close my eyes. I closed my eyes. She was right. It was there. Faint. More memory than sensation. But rhythmic. Persistent. 3, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Don't listen to it, I said, which was the stupidest thing I've ever said, like telling someone not to feel their own heartbeat. She got in her truck. She drove south. I drove to Brewer. I sat with my parents for 2 hours. My father asked me if I was eating enough. My mother asked me if I wanted to stay for dinner. I said no to both and drove back to Bar Harbor because the park still technically employed me and I had a hotel room I'd paid for through the end of the month and I had nowhere else to go. This morning, July 21st, I woke up at 5:50 a.m. and checked the NPS alerts page. The closure was posted at 6:15 a.m. Jordan Pond Trail, Bubbles Trail South, Carriage road intersections 14 through 17. Hazardous trail conditions pending geological assessment. Doug did it. Doug put it on paper, and someone listened. I drove to the Hulls Cove Visitor Center. The parking lot was mostly empty. A maintenance crew was loading barricades into a truck. I recognized one of them. He nodded at me, but didn't stop to talk. I sat in my car, and I wrote my resignation email. I have not heard from Doug since yesterday morning. I have not heard from Yui since the gas station. I texted her an hour ago. Are you okay? She hasn't read it. Here is what I think is happening under Acadia. And I want to be clear that this is not a conclusion, but a hypothesis from someone with a bachelor's degree in geology and 2 seasons of interpretive work. Something in the deep granite of Mount Desert Island has been awake for a long time. Longer than the 20 years of recorded incidents. Possibly since the intrusion cooled. It has been broadcasting since before there were ears to hear it, and the broadcast has been getting closer to the surface at a rate that, until recently, was imperceptible in a human lifespan. In the last 2 decades, it has reached the exposed bedrock. In the last 2 years, it has become strong enough to be felt by anyone who stands still and pays attention. In the last 2 weeks, it has begun expanding its reach outward through the continuous granite that forms the skeleton of the island. It is not hostile, it is not friendly. It is awake, and it is reaching, and it does not know or care that the surface of the island is covered in living things that are not made to survive contact with whatever it is. The warmth it offers is real. The peace it gives is real. The attention it pays is real. And none of those things are for us. They are side effects of something communicating with itself or with something else entirely. And we are in the way, and being in the way feels like being loved. And that is the danger. The closure will not be enough. The closure covers the area around the ledge. The phenomenon is no longer localized to the ledge. As of yesterday morning, it was detectable in every structure on the island that has contact with the bedrock. The closure would need to be the whole island. And even then, the question is not whether the boundary will hold, but when the granite beneath the ocean floor, which is the same formation, continuous and unbroken, stretching from Mount Desert Island to the mainland, will begin to carry the signal further. I am sitting in a comfort inn in Bar Harbor, which is on the island, which means I am sitting on the thing I am writing about. The hotel has a concrete slab foundation. The slab sits on fill. The fill sits on granite. I put my palm on the floor 5 minutes ago. It's here. Faint, barely there. A whisper of the rhythm I know, the breathing, the pulse, the primes. I need to leave the island. I know that. I need to get in my car and drive across the causeway and not come back. I will do that. I am going to do that. But I need to say one more thing. The primes have changed. When I first felt them through the hammer, they were simple. Small numbers. Calibration, Yui said. Checking if we could count. Last night, sitting on the concrete steps with Yui, the numbers were larger. I can't be certain of the values. Counting through vibration is imprecise, especially with large numbers, but the groups were long. 20, 30 beats in a sequence. And the rhythm between the groups had developed a secondary structure. Pauses of different lengths between the number sequences, as if the numbers were words and the pauses were the spaces between them, and the whole thing was a sentence being spoken very slowly by something that had just learned it had a mouth. This morning, on the floor of room 118 of the Comfort Inn in Bar Harbor, Maine, the sentence continued. I pressed my palm to the carpet over the concrete slab, and I felt it. The numbers, the pauses, the structure. I don't know what it's saying, but it's saying it faster. I'm going to get in my car now. I'm going to drive across the causeway. I'm going to check at the midpoint of the bridge whether the vibration has reached further than it did yesterday. If it has, if the signal is now in the bridge steel past the island abutment, I don't know what that means. I don't know what anyone can do about a phenomenon that propagates through continuous bedrock at an accelerating rate and offers the most profound peace you've ever felt as it swallows the ground beneath your feet. I'll update if I can. If Yui contacts me, I'll let you know. If Doug posts anything through official channels, I'll share it. One more thing. When I was sitting on the ledge that last night, the night of July 19th, in the 11 minutes before I stood up and left, I felt something that I have not mentioned until now because I have been trying to find a way to frame it that doesn't sound like what it sounds like. The vibration, in its final minute of contact, shaped itself against my palms into something that was not a number and not a pulse and not a rhythm. It was a shape, a complex, dimensional shape pressed into my skin from below, the way you might press a key into clay to make an impression. I felt the shape, and I knew immediately, with the bone-deep certainty of someone recognizing their own name, what it was. It was a map, a cross-section, a geological cross-section of the island, rendered in vibration, showing anyone who could feel it, the structure of the rock beneath, the layers, the intrusion, the formations. And at the center, deep, miles deep, deeper than any borehole has ever reached on Mount Desert Island, a void, not a cave, not a magma chamber. A void. An absence in the rock that was shaped like nothing I have a word for, except that it was large, and it was the source. And it was opening. I didn't tell you this. I haven't told Doug. I haven't told anyone until this sentence. The void is opening, and the vibration is its edge, and the edge is expanding at the rate that rock can learn to move. And the rock is learning faster than it should, and the thing inside the void has been awake for 400 million years, and is just now, just this month, reaching the surface for the first time. And it is pressing against the bottom of my hand with the tenderness of something that has waited so long for contact that it does not know the difference between touching and consuming. I'm leaving now. The drip from the window condensation is stopped. The room is very quiet. The floor is warm.